Okay, so you want to understand how humanity got from, like, setting foot on the moon to spreading across the stars.
Forming governments?
Yeah, forming governments, and even having a few galactic conflicts along the way. We've got your stack of historical documents
Right here.
right here. And let me tell you, it's a fascinating story. We're talking early expansion through the Sol system, the incredible discovery of blue space.
The rise and fall of empires.
Oh, yeah, empires. And even a glimpse into the current state of human civilization with all its, factions and alliances.
What's interesting is how these events, they aren't isolated incidents. They're all connected, like each one leading to the next.
Chain of events.
Yeah, forming this complex web of cause and effect.
Makes sense.
By examining these, like, pivotal moments, I think we can really understand how humanity got to where it is now in its current, well, rather complicated place in the galaxy.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Humanity's always had this thirst for exploration, right? I mean, we landed on the moon, then set our sights on Mars, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
Exactly. The successful terraforming of Mars in 2099, that was a real turning point.
Big moment.
It proved that we could not only survive, but thrive
Beyond Earth.
beyond Earth, yeah. And that success, combined with advances in cryogenics for, long-duration space travel, well, it fueled this huge wave of expansion throughout the Sol system.
We weren't just content with a few outposts.
Yeah,
We went all in colonies, space stations, mining operations, research facilities.
the whole shebang.
It was like this new gold rush,
Mhm.
but the frontier was, well, the entire solar system.
And that drive to push even further, that led to the launch of the first sleeper ship in 2128. It was aimed at a planet called Amaranth Major in the Gilgamesh system.
Wow, a sleeper ship.
This was a huge gamble, sending people on a one-way trip to a completely unknown world, with the hope of establishing the first extrasolar colony.
And then silence. For years.
Yeah.
No contact. Can you imagine the anxiety back on Earth?
Oh, I bet.
Wondering if the mission had succeeded, if those colonists were even still alive.
Talk about venturing into the unknown.
Right, total unknown.
The loss of contact with that early colony, it really highlights those immense challenges and risks involved in interstellar travel back then. Just the isolation, the uncertainty.
And the sheer courage it must have taken to embark on such a journey.
Exactly.
But then, in 2135, this discovery changed everything. Blue space, a team
Yes.
of researchers is investigating a gravitational anomaly, and bam,
They stumble into another star system.
light years away.
It was an accident that totally revolutionized space travel.
It's like finding a hidden network of tunnels connecting distant cities.
Exactly. And it made journeys that would take in generations possible in a matter of days or weeks.
Overnight, the galaxy became a lot smaller.
Right. The discovery of blue space led to the development of the Gateway Network, a series of these stable wormholes connecting star systems across the galaxy.
So cool. But early blue space travel, that must have been dangerous, right?
Oh, extremely dangerous. Navigating those rifts with all their unpredictable gravitational forces, it required incredibly skilled pilots.
On specially designed ships.
I can't even imagine what those early blue space pioneers went through. Talk about pushing the boundaries.
Risking their lives to chart these new pathways through the stars. They were trailblazers.
Forging a new era of human expansion.
And with that expansion, of course, came new challenges. As humanity spread across the stars, the need for, like, some kind of unifying structure became clear.
Governance, yeah. And that's how the Terran Commonwealth came into being in 2140.
Right. The Terran Commonwealth.
It's kind of like what we saw with the early empires back on Earth. Exploration led to colonization, and then the need for central authority emerged.
But managing a network of colonies that span multiple star systems, that's a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely. Initially, the Commonwealth aimed to, bring order and unity to human space. They focused on establishing trade routes, regulating blue space travel, providing a framework for intercolony relations.
Sounds good in theory.
But as their power grew, so did the resentment from some of the more distant colonies.
Think about it. You're out on the frontier, light years from Earth, building this new life. And suddenly you've got this centralized government, all these bureaucrats and regulations, imposing their will on you.
Yeah, a lot of colonists felt that the Commonwealth was too focused on Earth and that their concerns were being ignored. And this resentment simmered for decades, eventually boiling over into open rebellion.
And that brings us to the Heirs Confederation, formed in 2195, a coalition of colonies, primarily Martian, that declared independence from the Terran Commonwealth.
It marked a real turning point in human history. The era of unified human governance was over, replaced by this period of political fragmentation and escalating
The
tensions.
Heirs Confederation wasn't just a bunch of disgruntled colonies, right?
Yeah.
They represented a fundamental challenge to the Commonwealth's authority.
And they had the resources and the determination to back up their defiance.
Things escalated quickly. Both sides built up their militaries, engaged in these proxy wars and skirmishes across the fringes of human space.
A classic Cold War scenario. Two superpowers vying for dominance.
Each one fearful of the other's ambitions.
This period of tension and uncertainty, it lasted for years, fueling this sense of anxiety and paranoia.
It felt like the galaxy was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark to ignite a full-blown war.
And unfortunately, that spark came in 2202.
Oh boy.
The war between the Terran Commonwealth and the Heirs Confederation, it was brutal and devastating. It lasted for nearly 3 decades.
3 decades, wow.
It was a conflict that spanned multiple star systems, battles fought on planets, in space, and within those treacherous corridors of blue space.
I can't even imagine.
The war was a turning point, not just politically,
Right.
but also in how humanity viewed itself. It forced us to confront those darker aspects of our nature.
Our capacity for violence and destruction, even on a galactic scale.
Yeah.
It's hard to even fathom the scale of this conflict. Entire fleets clashing in the void, planets bombarded from orbit, millions of lives lost.
It's a stark reminder that progress doesn't necessarily equal peace.
It really makes you think.
And the consequences were far-reaching. The war crippled both the Terran Commonwealth and the Heirs Confederation, left them economically exhausted and politically unstable. And it led to this deep sense of disillusionment and cynicism among the survivors, a lot of whom had lost everything in the fighting.
So what happened next? Did humanity just, descend into chaos after this devastating war?
Not exactly. In the aftermath of the conflict, there was this growing realization, like on both sides, that the old ways of thinking, the us versus them mentality,
Yeah.
it had led humanity to the brink of self-destruction.
Wow.
There was this yearning for a new beginning.
A fresh start.
Yeah, a chance to rebuild and move forward.
And that led to the formation of the Sol Central Government, or SCG, in 2230.
Precisely. The SCG emerged from the ashes of the Terran Commonwealth, but it was a very different entity. It was more inclusive, more focused on, cooperation and diplomacy.
Less reliant on Earth-centric policies.
Exactly.
This is a pretty significant shift in thinking, wasn't it?
It was. Moving the capital of human government from Earth to Olympus on Mars. That was a symbolic gesture,
For sure.
but it also reflected the growing power and influence of the Martian colonies.
Right. Mars was stepping up.
It signaled a commitment to a more decentralized form of governance, one that recognized the diversity and autonomy of human colonies scattered across the stars. The SCG wasn't perfect, but it represented a genuine attempt to learn from the mistakes of the past and build a more sustainable future for humanity.
Sounds promising. But even with this new era of cooperation, there were still those who just yearned for complete independence, right?
Right. Enter the Gilgamesh League, a group of colonies in the, Gilgamesh system, that decided they wanted to chart their own course.
Another breakaway group.
The Gilgamesh League, which would later become the Gilgamesh Colonial Confederation, or GCC, saw the SCG as just another iteration of centralized control.
Even if it was a slightly more benevolent one.
Yeah, they believed that true freedom lay in complete autonomy, in forging their own destiny without interference from Earth or Mars.
So, another split. It seems like humanity can't seem to stay unified for very long.
It's a recurring theme throughout our history, isn't it? The desire for both unity and independence, for cooperation and competition.
Two sides of the same coin.
And the tension between those opposing forces, well, it often leads to conflict.
And in this case, that tension led to one of the most devastating conflicts in human history.
The Gaia conflict.
Yeah, this one was a real gut punch.
The Gaia conflict was a tragedy on multiple levels. It was a senseless war fueled by misunderstandings, political maneuvering, just escalating tensions,
It left a lasting scar on human civilization.
both physically and psychologically.
Let's break this down a bit. The Gaia conflict was essentially a clash between the SCG and the GCC, right?
That's right.
But how did this seemingly, minor border dispute escalate into a full-blown interstellar war?
It's a complex story, but it boils down to this series of miscalculations and escalations. It started with the Providence system, a relatively minor player, deciding to join the GCC in 2289.
Okay.
And the SCG saw this as a threat.
They did.
Yeah, they suspected the GCC of using, underhanded tactics to influence the vote. of expanding their sphere of influence through coercion rather than diplomacy. It wasn't necessarily a direct threat, but it raised concerns about the GCC's long-term ambitions.
So a bit of paranoia on both sides.
You could say that.
Yeah.
The SCG's suspicions weren't entirely unfounded, though. The GCC was becoming more assertive, more willing to flex its military muscle,
Okay.
and their intervention in a civil war in the Valley system in 2290 that further heightened tensions.
This intervention, it was basically a power grab, wasn't it? They marched in, stopped the fighting, and then just stayed put, effectively annexing the system.
Their actions sent a clear message. The GCC was no longer content to play a passive role in galactic politics. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they weren't afraid to challenge the SCG's dominance.
And the SCG wasn't about to back down, were they? They couldn't just let the GCC walk all over them.
Exactly. The SCG responded with economic sanctions. They imposed tariffs on GCC goods and limited their access to key resources. This sparked a trade war that further crippled the economies of both sides and just fueled resentment among the populations.
It was almost like they were sleepwalking into war.
I know, right?
Each side reacting to the other's moves, escalating the situation without really grasping the potential consequences.
There's a certain inevitability to it looking back, like this chain reaction, each action triggering a counter-reaction, building momentum until it just becomes unstoppable.
And then came the final straw. The GCC's decision to build a massive naval base in the Vega system in 2291.
That was a bold move, a clear challenge to the SCG's dominance in the region. The GCC claimed it was purely defensive, but the SCG saw it as a direct threat to their security.
A sign that the GCC was preparing for war.
Yeah.
So by this point, both sides were on edge.
Oh, yeah.
Their militaries on high alert, mistrust and suspicion just running rampant.
All it took was a spark to ignite the powder keg.
And that spark came in the form of a small, seemingly insignificant planet called Gaia.
Right. Gaia was this relatively peaceful, independent system located right on the border between SCG and GCC territory. In 2291, the people of Gaia held a referendum to decide whether to join the SCG or the GCC.
And their decision didn't go over well with one of those factions.
You guessed it. The vote was close, but it went in favor of the SCG. The GCC cried foul, accused the SCG of interfering in the vote, of using their influence to sway the outcome.
But the SCG insisted it was a fair democratic process.
They did, and to be fair, there's no concrete evidence to suggest they rigged the vote. But the GCC was convinced that the SCG had cheated, and they used this as a pretext to launch a preemptive strike.
And that's how the Gaia conflict began, with a disputed election on a backwater planet.
It's often those seemingly insignificant events that trigger the most significant consequences. And in this case, the Gaia referendum became the flashpoint for a war that would engulf the galaxy and leave millions dead.
Wow, talk about a butterfly effect.
Yeah.
Okay, so the GCC launches a surprise attack, catching the SCG off guard.
Right.
What happened next?
The GCC's opening move was brilliant, strategically speaking. They launched coordinated strikes on multiple fronts, overwhelming the SCG's 4th Fleet, which was stationed in the region. And they quickly captured several key star systems: Victor Star, Partheno, and Lakai.
That's a bold strategy, hitting multiple targets simultaneously. But was it reckless?
It's a question historians still debate. Their early successes were undeniable, but their rapid advance also left them vulnerable to counterattacks.
And the SCG, despite being caught off guard, wasn't out of the fight just yet.
Not at all.
So what was the SCG's response?
The SCE mobilized their remaining fleets, the 1st and 2nd, to defend key strategic positions and reinforce their defenses. The 1st Fleet, which was stationed near Earth, was dispatched to Gaia, hoping to prevent the GCC from gaining a foothold in that strategically vital system.
And what about the 4th Fleet?
The 4th Fleet, battered but not broken, was ordered to retreat to the Helios system and hold it at all costs. Helios was crucial because it contained a major gateway, a direct link to the Sol system. If the GCC captured Helios, they would have a clear path to Earth.
So a desperate last stand.
It was a heroic effort, a testament to the courage and determination of those sailors. They knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with everything they had.
Buying precious time for the SCG to regroup and organize a counteroffensive.
Exactly.
I can only imagine the pressure those sailors must have felt, knowing that the fate of Earth, of billions of lives, rested on their shoulders.
The weight of responsibility must have been immense, and ultimately their sacrifice proved in vain. In September of 2292, The Fourth Fleet was completely annihilated in a massive battle near the Helios Gateway.
That must have been a devastating blow, not just strategically, but psychologically.
The loss of the Fourth Fleet sent shockwaves through the SCG. It was a stark reminder of the GCC's military might and the very real threat they posed to Sol's security.
So the GCC had captured Helios, the gateway to Sol. Did they attack Earth?
They did not. Their focus shifted to Gaia, where they launched a massive invasion in May of 2292.
Why Gaia?
Gaia was strategically important. It was a key agricultural hub, providing food and resources to a significant portion of the SCG. Capturing Gaia would not only cripple the SCG's economy, but it would also be a huge symbolic victory.
Demonstrating the GCC's superiority.
Exactly.
So the GCC was aiming for a knockout blow.
It seems likely. And for a while, it looked like their strategy might succeed. The SCG forces on Gaia fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. By the end of 2292, most of the planet had fallen to the GCC.
So the SCG is on the ropes. They've lost the Fourth Fleet, their border defenses have crumbled, and now Gaia is about to fall.
Right.
How do they turn this around?
The turning point came in 2295 with the arrival of the Third Fleet.
Where had the Third Fleet been all this time?
The Third Fleet was scattered across SCG territory, performing various duties. It took time to gather them all in one place, to refit and resupply them for a major counteroffensive.
So it was a logistical challenge.
It was a massive undertaking, requiring coordination across multiple star systems and the mobilization of vast resources. But the SCG had no other choice. The Third Fleet was their last hope.
Okay, so the Third Fleet arrives, ready to take the fight to the GCC. What happens next?
Well, the arrival of the Third Fleet, along with this, surge in support from SCG member systems, it allowed Sol to launch a two-pronged counterattack.
A two-pronged attack, huh?
One force was tasked with retaking the Helios system, and that was led by Rear Admiral Barbara Anderson.
Okay.
The other, under the command of the now legendary Captain Lee Kyung, was sent to liberate Gaia.
Hold on, Captain Lee Kyung. Wasn't there, some mystery surrounding him and his ship, the Sugihara Chiun?
That's right. During the initial GCC offensive, Captain Kyung and the Sugihara Chiun, they just vanished. Rumors spread that they'd gone rogue, maybe even defected to the GCC, but it turned out they were operating deep behind enemy lines, gathering intel on GCC movements and logistics.
So a bit of a cloak and dagger operation.
Exactly. A ghost ship striking from the shadows. Kyung and his crew, they played a vital role in the war effort.
They did.
The intelligence they gathered, it proved crucial in planning the counteroffensive, allowed the SCG to target weak points in the GCC's defenses and exploit their overextended supply lines.
Sounds like they were a real pain for the GCC.
They were.
Okay, so let's talk about the counteroffensive itself. Anderson's forces were aiming for Helios, right? The gateway to Sol. How did that operation go?
Anderson's task force encountered surprisingly light resistance at Helios.
Really?
Seems the GCC, they anticipated a counterattack and had already begun withdrawing their forces from the system.
So they could focus on defending Gaia.
Exactly.
That was a lucky break for the SCG. And what about Captain Kyung and the fight for Gaia? That must have been a much tougher battle.
The battle for Gaia was brutal, really protracted. The GCC had dug in, fortified their positions, deployed their most advanced weaponry.
Sounds rough.
The floating was intense, heavy losses on both sides.
But in the end, the SCG prevailed.
Yes, but it came at a high cost. The Battle of Gaia raged for almost a year. Street-to-street fighting, orbital bombardments, desperate counterattacks.
Wow.
It wasn't until October of 2296 that the last GCC forces surrendered, leaving the planet a devastated wasteland.
A hard-won victory for sure. After 4 long years of conflict, the Gaia conflict finally came to an end.
Right.
But at what cost?
Both sides were utterly exhausted, economies in ruins, countless lives lost.
Yeah, the Gaia conflict was a victory for the SCG, but definitely a Pyrrhic one.
They'd repelled the GCC invasion, but at a terrible price. Entire fleets decimated, planets scarred, and a whole generation was left carrying the psychological wounds of war.
And what about Gaia itself?
Yeah.
What became of the planet that was at the heart of this whole mess?
Gaia was left a shattered world. Cities in ruins, its population decimated. And as part of the peace treaty, Gaia was declared a demilitarized zone, a neutral territory administered by both the SCG and the GCC.
It's a reminder, isn't it? A reminder of the cost of war, how even the victors suffer. And even though the fighting stopped, the scars of the Gaia conflict, they continue to shape galactic politics to this day.
The Gaia conflict had a profound impact on the course of human history. It reshaped the balance of power, led to new weapons technologies, and sowed the seeds of mistrust that persist even now, decades later.
So looking back, it's clear how we got from those first tentative steps on the moon to this complex, often chaotic interstellar civilization we have today.
Yeah.
It's a story of ambition and innovation, but also of conflict and the dangers of unchecked power. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What will the next chapter of human history hold? Will we continue down this path of division and conflict? Or will we finally learn from the mistakes of the past and find a way to, forge a better future? It's something to think about.
Yeah, the future's unwritten, and it's up to all of us to decide what kind of legacy we'll leave behind.